welcome back to yet another week of Behind the Lens. I'm Debbie Elias, film critic, creator, and host of Behind the Lens, where we go behind the lens and below the line with those movers and shakers, the film and TV makers, the producers, directors, actors, writers, cinematographers, production designers, costume designers, set decorators, composers, sound editors, sound mixers, authors, and of course, those VFX gurus. So, welcome. Hey, if you're tuning in on the adrenalineradio.com Facebook page right now, yes, I'm in studio this week. Woohoo! I am sitting here and, I'm going to bring something up in just a second here, but let me tell you who we got on the show today. Been a busy couple of weeks here. I hope you enjoyed last week's pre-recorded show. And I hope you've checked out the film The Brink Of. Really, absolutely charming and sweet film. So wonderful. And Patrick Meany is he's a wonderful filmmaker. I hope you've been checking out some of the other films that are out there. Because one thing I do know is you weren't at the box office for The Fall Guy this weekend. Disappointing box office numbers. But, everybody keeps saying, kicked off summer. No, it isn't summer yet. Summer is Memorial Day weekend. That's it, plain and simple. I have not seen The Fall Guy yet because Universal doesn't invite me to their screenings. But I will be seeing it this week because I will be interviewing, once again, the sound guru of all sound gurus, Mark Steckinger. When it comes to action, Mark is the man that you want. As all of you, my regular listeners, as you may recall, Mark has been the sound designer, supervising sound editor on all the John Wick films. And that's just a tiny smidgen of what he and his team at Formosa do. So it makes perfect sense that Mark is the man on The Fall Guy with all the explosions and action that we have seen just in the trailers. So I'm looking forward to speaking with Mark. I think it's going to be later this week, but I will be watching The Fall Guy, paying actual money to go see it in my local theater. So I'll fill you in once I do see it. Now, speaking of The Fall Guy, sad news this morning in the stunt world. The legendary Jeannie Epper just passed away yesterday at the age of 83. Jeannie, she's part of the Epper dynasty of stunt people, and particularly Jeannie and her sisters, all stunt women. But other members of the family, this is a whole generational thing with the Eppers. But Jeannie, such a glass ceiling breaker, literally and figuratively. Most of you may know her as she was Linda Carter's stunt double for Wonder Woman. Also, in Romancing the Stone, she was Kathleen Turner's stunt double as she is on a rope swinging across waterfalls and deserts and plunging into whatever. Jeannie is a legend in the stunt industry. She was a co-founder of the Stunt Women's Association. A year later, she was the president of the association. She has been honored with a Taurus Award. She is a legend, an absolute legend. And she really just upped the ante and opened so many doors for women in the stunt world. Because for many decades, women were not doing stunts. When female actresses needed a stunt double, it was a guy that they would put in a dress and a wig. But as times changed, and Jeannie Epper was one of those that helped open the door for female stunt people. She's a legend. She will never be forgotten. And with that in mind, I encourage you all again to check out my friend Scott McGee, his book. Let me get the title correct. And, of course, Jeannie is mentioned in this book, Danger on the Silver Screen, 50 Films Celebrating Cinema's Greatest Stunts. It's Scott, of course, as many of you know, is with TCM. The book is fabulous. A lot of the stuntmen that I know personally and knew, those that are no longer with us, are mentioned in the book with the various films and some of the feats of daring do that they executed on the silver screen. Jeannie was definitely one of them. So my condolences, because I had the pleasure of meeting Jeannie many, many, many times. So my condolences to her family with her passing. But to borrow from what Scott McGee said this morning about her, she was a wonder of a woman. So that alone is reason to see the Fall Guy to celebrate stunts in honor of Jeannie Epper. So on today's show, we got a little mix happening here. Very excited. At the midpoint of the show, director Danny Lee is going to join us to talk about his new documentary. Just came out in limited release on the 3rd, which was, what day was the 3rd? Friday. All the days kind of run together, people. I only watched 13 feature films and 2 shorts over just on Saturday and Sunday. So, still, the mind is befuddled, the eyes are bleary. But Danny's documentary, Who is Stan Smith? Number one, I know who Stan Smith is. I'm that old. I know who Stan Smith is, and I'm betting that many of you do too. Stan Smith is a former world champion tennis player, won Wimbledon, U.S. Open, singles and doubles, so many other of the Grand Slam tournaments. An incredible guy, a nice guy. But I think and if you're in my age bracket, you were lucky enough to be introduced to Stan Smith via ABC's Wide World of Sports back in the 1960s. So that was my first introduction. And also and it was thanks to Stan Smith and thereafter Billie Jean King that I actually took an interest in tennis specifically because of Stan and because of Billie Jean. But most of you out there today, you might know the name Stan Smith thanks to a very specific brand of Adidas, the Stan Smith sneaker. It's a great shoe. I used to own a pair. First leather sneaker. And the design of the sneaker was very interesting because it had holes on each side, on both sides of each shoe, to allow air to circulate in the feet. Because as you also will hear in the documentary, in certain anecdotes and tales from Stan and from his former doubles partner, Bob Lutz, talking about how hot their feet got. And with this new Stan Smith sneaker by Adidas, their feet would get so sweaty that the sweat would actually spray out of the holes on the sides of the shoes. But what makes the Stan Smith sneaker so integral is how it became a fashion status symbol. This is the first sneaker it bore not only Stan Smith's signature, but his face on the tongue of the shoe. And as is pointed out by one sports journalist in the documentary, even Michael Jordan does not have his face on his shoe. The Stan Smith shoe became an integral part of the fashion world, pop culture. Celebrities were seen wearing the shoe. And if you go back in archives to pictures of rock stars and, David Bowie did photo covers wearing the Stan Smith sneaker. Mick Jagger was seen wearing the Stan Smith sneaker. It was everywhere, and there have now been so many different designs and colors done of the Stan Smith sneaker, but there was always Stan's signature and his face on the tongue of the shoe. But what I love with this documentary is we get to see who Stan was behind the tennis racket and behind the sneaker. And this is one of the most uplifting and enjoyable documentaries that I have seen in a while. There's no sensationalism here. There's no cause celeb being promoted. It is just the story of a man. And we should all have the morals and integrity and ethic that Stan Smith does. So I can't wait to talk to director Danny Lee when he joins us. But first, visual effects artisans. You're about to take a listen to my exclusive interview with Marcus Taormina, the VFX supervisor on Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, which is out now. Zack Snyder's Part 2 of who knows how many films we're going to have. It's on Netflix. It's on Netflix now. I love the series. I love the first movie of Rebel Moon Part 1. Loved it. Part 1, A Child of Fire, where we get introduced to all of the characters and the galactic situation at the time. Part 2 picks up with battles. Battles, and more battles. As the people of Velt have to battle for their own survival. There's aerial battles, there's ground battles, there's underground battles. The visual effects are phenomenal. And I have to say, see Part 1 for the backstory, for the characters, to be informed. See Part 2 for incredible visual effects. Weta was responsible for most of the visual effects, the aerials, whereas, who was it? Now I can't find my notes. Whereas Scanline did the visual effects on the ground battles. And something that you're going to hear Marcus talk about, very, very important, is that the ground battles were actually shot in Southern California and up in Santa Clarita. Because of fire restrictions in Southern California and in the Santa Clarita area, you cannot have explosions, pyro, or anything like that due to the fire zoning laws. So every ember, fire, explosion, everything was all digital. They were only able to do one in-camera blast. It was shot an incredible 500 frames per second. And based on that one shot that they got to do, that one in-camera blast, which was extremely contained, based on that, Marcus and his team then populated the entire ambience of the ground battles with the things like the dust and the smoke and, bits and pieces of debris and little rocks and things that go flying after you have an explosion. Fascinating way to bring this story to part 2 of this story to life. But it's an effects heavy part 2. It's wonderfully executed. And of course, Jimmy the Robot is back. If you watched part 1 of Rebel Moon or you've seen part 2, Jimmy the Robot, voiced by Sir Anthony Hopkins, Jimmy is the reason to see both films. Let's face it. So, without me prattling on anymore, I'll let you take a listen to the wonderful Marcus Taormina talking about Rebel Moon Part 2. And, of course, he did work on Part 1, just so you know. But talking about Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Marcus. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for taking the time.
I have to say, I absolutely love the VFX work that you have done on Rebel Moon Part 2 SCARGIVER.
Thank you so much.
The story falls a little bit. It's not as interesting as Part 1, but this is where your work with all the battle sequences, be it ground battles, aerial battles, or interiors such as in the Dreadnought, you cannot look away. You cannot look away.
I appreciate that because, like, you know, it's we had a lot of fun doing it, but we really wanted to make it continually interesting. You know, it's a parallel montages that multiple montages that last, you know, almost 40 minutes. So you got to keep them interesting visually. So that was the ultimate goal. I appreciate you saying that.
You really did. I mean, with those battles, and it is, the montages are wonderful. And the fact that it's also edited with some slow motion in there, a lot of slow motion. So I'm curious, from your perspective, from the VFX standpoint, how do these slow motion aspects, does that impact your work?
It does, because, you know, what the tricky thing with those shots is keeping something moving in camera, right, and keeping the visual flair, like, happening. Otherwise, they get, you know, a little bit stale at times. And so, you know, like, if you talk about the final battle where there's the bridge, like, we had a couple, there's one shot in particular where in profile and Titus and Tarek are making their way over the bridge. They're on the right side. The soldiers are coming from the left. And so we did a couple iterations of that where it's just like, we need more tracers. You know, we need to have more tracers. And then you go, okay, we have the amount of tracers. We got a nice, like, flare, both visually and actually practically. But then we're like, okay, well, let's add some dust hits and some slag bits too. So those will keep it alive because that'll expand across the shot. And, you know, as these shots go long, we're trying to make pieces appear, reappear, you know, just keep them visually interesting. That was, that's kind of, I think, the trick to those. And it's small pieces too, you know, it's very small things that just add a lot of depth to it. I think I'll jump back to, like, movie 1 too, when Tarek jumps off of the ledge onto the Bennu. That shot is like 1,000 frames a second, and so we added little bits and pieces of pebbles and dust, just expanding when Tarek's foot comes off of the ledge, just so something is moving in camera, and you're like, okay, cool. And the other thing is, we don't always render the effects at their native frame rate. So even though, you know, back to the bridge shot in movie 2 might be 500 frames a second, we might be rendering some of the effects at, you know, 250, just to change it up, make it a little bit different.
That bridge sequence is just wonderful. I have to tell you. I don't know what I like more, the bridge sequence there in the final act or the battle between Korra and Noble on the Dreadnought, which, of course, you watch that.
Pretty exciting.
It's like lightsaber battles, saber battles. It's very Star Wars. It's very sci-fi. We get the immediate galactic connection for this happening in space. And I like that, you know, mental image that you get while you're watching this play out.
Yeah.
So we've got the touchstones there to a known world for us, for all the moviegoers. But to see it in this context, it works really well without somebody saying, oh, all you did was copy the Star Wars sequences. No, you did not.
Yeah, thank you. And we didn't, but it's also like, okay, we're all film buffs. We all love film. Like, Star Wars is iconic. And so we look at Star Wars, we look at Dune, we look at all of them, right? And we go, okay, what works in all of these movies? And then how can we make it better? You know, like, how can we enhance that action? Or, you know, if you want to talk about the sabers for a second, like, you know, okay, that's great, but they have an established look that they cannot change from Star Wars now because people will lose their mind. We have the opportunity to to do whatever we want. And so that's when we added all this like smoke, the heat signature. You know, we were motivated by light painting, so there's the long streaking. We changed, you know, as we developed them, you know, we said, okay, Nemesis is going to be warm with like a bluer tinge at the end, and it melds into purple. And then, okay, so then when Cora and Noble, they're going to be blue, and we'll flip-flop it, so they'll have orange streaking. And it just adds like a cool effect to it, and the heat signature and the smoke. And so we kept developing those, and it was just, you know, everyone goes, oh, it's a light stick in someone's hand. I was like, yeah, but it's drastically different if you compare the two.
I love the use of color. You've got a lot of great use of color happening here, which also differentiates Rebel Moon, as particularly Part 2, from other sci-fi films that we have seen and know and love, and in some cases hate, because you introduce color that it's not just black and white, inky shades of bluish gray. You give us those heat signatures, and you carry them throughout the scene imagery. It's not just a blip or a saber that is a color. It's heat signatures, and particularly in the Dreadnought as they're sliding, as it's plummeting and they're sliding across the floor. We're getting striations of color in there. And it's true color that picks up the engine room rusts and oranges and things like that. So I really love that attention to detail from the VFX standpoint.
Yeah, thank you. It is something we looked a lot at, you know, and like you look at complementary colors, you know, you go to film school, right? And we all like, if you go to the basics, like 101, it's like color tells a story too. So we tried to like do as much as we could to keep it consistent, but also try to tell the story through that. And then obviously the visuals as well. And then just keep it interesting too, you know, and it was a fun experience to kind of have all those together, you know, knowing when we were building movie 2 that no one had, you know, movie 1 hasn't even been seen yet, but even like things that we were doing in 1, we would like colors or color schematics when we were filing the shots. So that's really pleasant to look at. Okay, let's bring that over here to movie 2. And so, yeah, I appreciate that attention to detail that you caught, because we actually did a lot. We had a lot of those conversations as we were developing, too.
Well, another big aspect of this film, and particularly the battle sequences, are the ground battles as a whole. How many digi-doubles did you have to create for that? Because I know you shot the ground battle sequences. You were shooting this up in Santa Clarita area.
Yeah.
And the fire laws up there, you can't bring in practical fire effects, shall we say.
Can't do any of it. You're absolutely right.
So,
research.
Oh, I know so many guys that go up there to shoot, and so many second unit crews that over the decades, and that is a huge concern.
Yeah, it was the ground battle was tricky because obviously we couldn't do any practical pyro. But we did get a chance to do one. And that was huge for us. We got the big boom house is what we call it. When the first mech turns and fires on the boom house and that explodes, that was all a practical explosion, which was an absolute insane explosion. And the intent, we talked about this with our special effects supervisor, with Zach. It's like, if we're going to do this, we're going to barely touch it. And so when we shot it actually, when we got the dailies back, it's amazing because the concussive wave rips through the village and it actually hits the bridge, and and the dust poof off the bridge. It's like fine particulate that you don't even see in any, like you wouldn't see it otherwise with your bare eyes. And so that became the catalyst for like all of our explosions across the movie 2 and like the ground battle. And we're like, no, our effects need to look like this or be better, and they need to ripple through or look better. And so that was you know, our iconic shot that we tried to bring through everything else. And then we got a chance to do a couple of like the big huge ground hits, but we had to, you know, seam in all of our digital pyro explosions, which, you know, again, talking about high frame rates, that's another thing. we got a chance to shoot a bunch of elements of explosions at 500 frames a second at the very end of our shoot, and I used those as basically for our effects artists to model out and to reference, because it's very different looking at an explosion with our eyes than looking at it at 500, 1,000 frames a second.
Yeah.
And so I wanted that visual reference. And as far as the digi-doubles are concerned, like, you only had anywhere from like 40 to 60 soldiers max, and everything else, and the dust too, like, with such a large space, even though it feels very small with Zell, it's a very large space to cover with atmospherics, with smoke and such.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those shots, we had to like layer in multiple layers of smoke, multiple digi-doubles. We obviously had to populate. We didn't have enough dummy bodies for the ground, so we had to populate digi-double dummies, essentially on the ground from all the war-torn battle. And then we'd get down and edit, and we'd have to shuffle things around. So we'd actually have to paint out a bunch of soldiers because, they were too far forward, and we'd have to add our digis back into it. So
I was watching that, and that really amazed me, Marcus, because you've got the lines of soldiers that are coming. You have all of the residents of Velt, but it's the soldiers really, because they're marching in formation and emerging from the smoke. And then you see another line coming in, and another, but then you see part of it shaving off to the left. So it was really interesting watching that and the detail that you had to employ for all of that. And I'm just looking, and it was like digi-double heaven.
It was a huge puzzle too to figure that out. It took a long time for the ground battle to really figure out what mech needed to come, what soldiers were that mech, where, and then it's also like the multiple stages of destruction that we had to do for those pieces as well.
And then you've got the underground aspect as well.
Yep, that's right. So we had a bunch of the trench stuff. Again, we couldn't do any practical pyro, couldn't do any embers. Had to do that as like a tricky multi-element explosion composite with digital effects on top of it that then comes back up through the trenches, in that big wide explosion stuff. And then most of those were in camera to an extent, and because there was no danger to our stunt performers.
Right.
But yeah, well, it was a lot of work. It was a big, huge puzzle to solve. But thank you for noticing that attention to detail.
And I like that even underground, you carry through with the atmosphere and the smoke and rock and dirt and dust flying in the air. You're very, very consistent with that. What you did with the one effect you could do, the one practical you could do, and the result, the physical result from that, you really carry that through with the smaller explosions and the man-on-man battles that we see unfold. And I really like that attention to detail, because it bumps up the viewing experience and the story as a whole. We feel it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like those added little details as an audience member, you're noticing, but my hope is that you're noticing because you see it and you've seen the other way where it doesn't look good or it doesn't feel right. The hope is that everyone just settles in and they're like, yeah, I buy it the whole time, because like as soon as you get a shot that doesn't feel dirty or grimy, it's like, wait, what happened? Then you're out of the story, right? And so it's good that like you can settle down for 40 minutes and just watch it.
Well, I have to ask you about my favorite part of the entire series, be it part 1 or part 2, Jimmy the robot.
Jimmy's awesome.
Oh my God, seeing him enter into the battle sequence, from a story standpoint, it's wonderful. He is beyond sentient. He now has a conscience, and he can make his own choices. So it's wonderful to see that. Very akin to like Data in Star Trek.
Yeah.
But it is the mechanics. How challenging was that for you? Because he is not stiff. He is not just walking. He is now engaged in battle with parkour and martial arts configurations as he's tackling the Big Macs. Talk to me about bringing Jimmy to life.
That was really, it was tricky, but also I got to commend our stunt team because they had we had Trevor, who was our stunt performer, to do Jimmy that little bit. Like we talked about it, and I said, okay, the intention is if Trevor does the action and we get good, like, tight reactions, even if I have to kind of split them out or, paint out this soldier and put a digidouble in there, like, I want plates. Like, I want physical action. I want physical camera moves. Mm-hmm. And same with Zach, like, of course, Zach is agreeing, but also saying this as well. And it's like, then we'll figure out, like, it was almost like backwards engineering. Okay, how do we get Jimmy to do the same performance? And then for Trevor, who was only like 5 foot, I gotta actually look up his height, but he was shorter than Dustin for sure. I think he was 5'7", and so we have to retarget his performance and his proportions to actually Jimmy's proportions, which became tricky. But and then you get Dustin pieces in between those. So the whole Jimmy battle is a combination of Dustin and Trevor action, and it's also full digital shots. So I just try to keep it consistent and knowing all the things that we set up from in movie one, even though Jimmy was a lot slower and didn't have the action and parkour that we do in movie two. We knew that was coming, so we were doing all the prep work and doing all the animation tests ahead of time to make sure that they lined up. And that's one of the sequences that I'm really proud of, because it was it's actually quite tricky. And if you look at the underlayer of all of it, it won't make any sense to a lot of people, but it's pretty seamless in the end, I think.
I have one last question then for Marcus. How many, with the stuff that Scanline did, the stuff that Weta did, and I love Weta, how many visual effects shots did you have just in part two?
1,316.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Are you going to top?
Scanline did the majority of the ground battle, and Weta did the majority of all the aerial stuff up in the Dreadnought, aerial battle, all that stuff.
Wow. So are you coming back for part three? Am I going to get part three now? Because the way it ended, and I'm like, more?
We'll see. I don't know. I can't answer that without a little hesitation. I don't know, but you'll get more in the director's cut and the extended cuts that come out in the summer. So check those out.
I'm chomping at the bit for those, and then maybe M can hook us up again so I can talk about the extras that I haven't gotten to see.
You'll love them.
Oh, Marcus, thank you so much. This has been a joy, and I do hope we get to speak again in the future. And that was Marcus Taormina, VFX Supervisor for Rebel Moon Part 2. If you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix. Check it out. It's well worth it. And Marcus gives you a little bit of insight there into the magic behind the battles. And, of course, behind those sequences with Jimmy the Robot. And if you've seen Part 1 and or Part 2, you all know how great Jimmy the Robot is. So, check it out. I highly recommend it. But as I prefaced, the story lacks a little in the second film. The story itself is much stronger in Part 1. Part 2, it lacks a little, but the action and the visual effects that it takes to achieve that action more than makes up for it. And yes, I'm anxiously awaiting the director's cut and extended cuts later this summer on Netflix. So, we're going to switch gears now. I am so excited and so thrilled to have Danny Lee joining us to talk about Who is Stan Smith. Hi, Danny.
Hello.
I have to congratulate you. It's not often that I can say a documentary is uplifting. And that's exactly what Who is Stan Smith is. It is uplifting. It is a feel-good documentary. There is no sensationalism. You show us a man who has morals, ethics, integrity, kindness, generosity, and anybody that doesn't know who Stan is, they will fall in love with him by the end of this documentary.
Amazing. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Uh-oh.
It sounds pretty faint for me.
Uh-oh. Can you adjust that a little, Pam? All right. Pam's playing with that. Is that any better?
A little bit better, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. See what else, if you can play a little more, Pam. That's, she likes
I think I could definitely use some volume.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You know, this is, now I knew who Stan Lee was. The man with the racket, the man with the shoe. I used to own Stan Lee sneakers.
By the way, Stan Smith.
Stan Smith, sorry. I know Stan Smith, Danny Lee, I'm confusing you.
And there is a Stan Lee.
Yes.
Stan Lee.
But Stan Smith, I had the shoe, and I still remember when I first saw Stan play tennis, it was back in the 60s on ABC Wide World of Sports.
Mm.
And then followed up with Billie Jean King is what really got me excited and interested in tennis. And the shoe, of course, well, that was just a cool shoe to have in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
It still is a cool shoe to have.
Mm-hmm.
But now, how familiar were you with Stan Smith?
I think like most people, I had a cursory knowledge, maybe a little bit deeper because I'd recently became a bit of a tennis fanatic. But I remember being in high school in the 90s, and the Stan Smith shoe was everything. If you had that, you had a bit of prestige that was associated with you. So I knew it via the shoe. You knew he was a tennis great, but to the extent of his entire story, I didn't know that until I got into the film and started doing some deeper research. I did not know about his efforts to democratize and unionize tennis. I did not know about his deep relationship with Arthur Ashe, or this incredible story of him, sort of striking up this unlikely friendship with Mark Mathabane, this young black tennis upstart, and helped him essentially escape death and apartheid, and helped sort of sponsor him in the States. And he goes on to become a best-selling author. Yeah. It's just, these stories, you couldn't script it better. And it's this extraordinary tale that just simply deserves to be told. And so it was, going into this wormhole was an incredible experience for me.
I mean, I remember so much, having lived it. I remember a lot of Stan Smith on the court and things that happened, what his involvement as well as the other guys, the ATP, and trying to, unionize, and his battles with Elie Nastase, and Nastase was just, people have talked, the next generation talked about McEnroe, but I think Nastase was actually worse than McEnroe in his behavior on the court. I'm not sure. So to see and get the perspective in the documentary of Stan's take on it, and also his former doubles partner, Bob Lutz, is really fascinating. Now, I knew nothing about Mark's story and Stan and Arthur Ashe's involvement in bringing Mark to the United States and essentially, as you said, saving his life. That is just a testament to who he is. That in a nutshell. And it explains a lot of the life that you unfold and unpack for us in this documentary. You talked about research. Now, I am seeing so many archival materials there. How deep into the wormhole did you dive, Danny?
We went pretty deep, and I say we because we had a pretty good post-production team and archival team that I have to give a lot of credit to. We had a team of 5 or 6 that just scraped at the absolute barrel looking for archival materials, because tennis back then wasn't the tennis of today.
Right.
And often some of these high-profile matches were simply covered by 1 or 2 photographers. So there were a lot of instances, you'd be surprised, for the 1968 U.S. Open, we couldn't find any video footage of it, any film footage. So we had to rely on a handful of black and white photos. So the archival was definitely special in this regard. And also, I recall in my very first meeting with Stan and Margie, who Margie you'll see in the film, who is his wife, and plays such an integral role in the story. And you'll see it's a major storyline. She perked up at our meeting and said, "Oh, we have all these, unexposed, undeveloped film reels upstairs in the closet."
Oh my God!
And I lost my mind. She ran upstairs, grabbed these film reels, and right then I knew that we not only probably had gold, because she mentioned the era. She said these were from the late '60s up until the late '70s. And that was like the heyday of Stan's career,
Yes.
and of course it was never before seen footage. So a lot of that stuff you see when the Davis Cup are traveling the world, playing set against this tumultuous backdrop of the Vietnam War and apartheid. All that is original footage. So it was such a blessing, because typically when you're telling a story in retrospect, and especially one that dates back to the 60s, you're going to be limited in what you have, and you always want to transport the viewer. As a filmmaker, I want to transport the viewer to that time and place as best as I can. And it was an amazing treasure trove of material to play with. It really was.
I have to tell you, as you were telling me this story about Margie and these films, these reels, I mean, I got goosebumps. A find like that, Danny, for any filmmaker, that just had to just put you over the moon. That was like the heavens, the finger of God came down, and like, you're on the right path, Danny Lee.
Yeah, and again, that's credit to Margie. She is the rock. She was so helpful in the filmmaking process too. They're just an extraordinary family. It is such a blessing to have met them and become really close with them over this process. I
mean, you just watch them on screen, whether they're sitting there in the living room together talking, or the camera, we're focusing on just one or the other. They are, two sides of the coin. They are perfectly meshed together.
Truly.
And watching this, I could not imagine Stan achieving what he achieved without Margie.
That's correct. That is correct.
And this is a testament to you and your team, Danny, in developing the through line for the documentary, and then your editors culling all of this. When did you have a through line plotted out from the beginning? Did you always intend to use the shoe as the entree into Stan Smith? Talk to me about that process, because I know oftentimes a through line is hard to find when you suddenly get a wealth of material like you got here with one specific maybe decade or decade of 15 years. What was that process for you?
I think you nailed it. That was probably one of the most challenging aspects of the film, is you have this embarrassment of riches, but also you have these divergent stories, right? The shoe and Stan's tennis career, they didn't align in terms of the apex of each story, right? Mm-hmm. Stan's career had exploded, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. But as it started to sunset in the mid to late 70s with his tennis elbow and all that, the shoe started to ascend. So they were, and Stan says it in the film, he and Donald weren't even aware of the shoe's groundswell, this popularity on the ground all over the world. They weren't even aware of it. So it was incredibly challenging, but I did know very early on that this would be more or less an investigative documentary, right? It would be a film that sort of catered to the casual viewer in terms of, you know the name and you know the shoe, but you probably don't know the extent of the story, you probably don't even know that he was a tennis great, that was Mr. America in the late 60s and 70s, because much of the audience who know the name know it via the sneaker, and they know it's a very clean shoe that has this sense of elegance and prestige to it, that's incredibly multi-purpose and functional. You can wear it with jeans, or you could wear it with a tux. And so I knew that we needed to hook the viewer from a contemporary angle and present this idea that in the film we are going to unpack the mythology around the shoe and reveal who this man is. And I think in the process, what I learned is that we weren't just revealing this tennis great who had done so much for the sport, who brought it into the modern era where, athletes were allowed to be professional and make money and essentially, challenge. What's so great about Stan is he was groomed from the beginning to be, to work in that system in which the federations and the associations had all the power, right? He was groomed by the Pasadena tennis patron, sort of plucked from his obscurity, recognized for his raw athletic ability, and sort of put into the system where he was destined to play all the Grand Slams and work within the system. And he did that in 71, ascending to win Wimbledon. But then the next year he turns around and defies the very system he was groomed to succeed in. And that was so courageous. But not only did we learn that, but as we continue peeling back the layers of this rich onion, you discover that he had all these humanitarian feats that, again, he never touted to be this man of virtue. He just did quietly. And I think that's the most special part of this story, is that we get to spotlight all the good things he did when he never cared to get credit for them. And that's such a lesson I think we can all learn, is that if you do good, karmically will be rewarded. And I genuinely think the success of the shoe is a bit of karma for him.
Yeah.
He didn't go into this wanting to become, filthy rich off a shoe or become known for all the stuff he did for, everyone.
In his checklist of things to do, getting rich wasn't on there.
I don't think so.
That was not.
He talks about his checklist.
Yeah,
right? He just wanted to. He wanted to be great.
I love the fact that you bring us back to that checklist, with a pencil. We've got a little notebook and a pencil, and we're writing down 1, 2, 3, and ultimately we get to 4. And I think that is so charming in terms of an interstitial with the different steps and achievements in his career. I just thought that added such a homespun charm to a guy back in 1965, 66, when a junior player, he would have been using a pencil and a little notebook. And that just, it was like icing on the cake. You really brought in little touches like that, Danny, that I so appreciated. And so much of this comes through also with your editing. How long once you were deciding on your through line, how long was this editing process? Because of having so much to go through in terms of archival, be it photographs, be it newspaper clippings. I love the montages and the highlighting, the yellow highlighter with the newspaper clippings that you do. Those are beautifully done. So you keep us visually engaged and interested. But I'm curious, how long was this editing process? I hear the laughter.
Number one, I appreciate all your attention to detail, too. That actually makes it all worth it because, as a filmmaker, I try to imbue the film with Easter eggs and touches where it's never overbearing but it enhances things. So for you to even notice any of that stuff is incredible. Thank you. Regarding how long it took, I think it roughly was about 21 weeks altogether. We had to stack editors, which means, one. So we had 2 great editors on it. It was led by Kelsey Santee, who is a very close collaborator of mine. She and I have worked on.
You've done several things together. Yeah, you've done
Yeah.
several things. Yeah.
We've got great synergy together for sure, and and then we brought on another editor by the name of Todd Schroeder, who essentially cut all of Wimbledon, and we were sort of moving in tandem. There was just a lot of material, more archival than original, and from a storytelling perspective, there were some challenges in it because Stan's story inherently didn't have a lot of conflict, right? And any story needs that tension and conflict. But he had almost lived this almost nearly a perfect life, except for the tennis elbow. But so we had to figure out where is the tension and drama going to come from, and it was very clear that it was coming from the outside world. You found Stan playing in the middle of Vietnam or playing through the civil rights movement, backing up Arthur, or all these, and Mark Matabani and apartheid in South Africa. It became clear that we had to source the tension from the outside. So translating that to editing became tricky. That's why you'll see in the 68 sequence when Arthur wins the U.S. Open, we decided to juxtapose that with all the tension in the streets. So as this black man, the first black player to win the U.S. Open, is ascending, the streets are in complete chaos and turmoil. And we wanted to show that tennis was insulated to some degree, but more importantly, Stan was. And Stan had grown up, as he described, in this waspy environment in Pasadena where he was pretty insulated. And his experience at USC in South LA and also, his friendship with Arthur opened his eyes and laid the foundation and laid basically the groundwork for him to have these transformative moments later on where, I genuinely believe his experience with Arthur led him to Mark Matabani and beyond. So all of that was very tricky editing, and it was generally a fast schedule, but, hopefully we made it happen.
Well, something, and you brought up Wimbledon again, because you said Todd edited the Wimbledon sequences. But for modern day, where Stan goes back to Wimbledon, I have to compliment you. Nice little touches in there. We see the little Wimbledon sign, keep off the grass. And the entire time we see Stan out there at center court.
He's on the grass.
But he's just on the edge. On the very edge. So it's kind of like he is paying attention to keep off the grass. But I just thought that was adorable. I thought it was so cute. And such a nice
fun little anecdote. Stan mistakenly walked onto the court, and even Stan Smith was reprimanded. Someone was like, "You got to get off the grass."
Oh my gosh! Now see that you should have included. You should have filmed that and included that. That would have been hilarious. There would have been your one bit of personal conflict for Stan Smith. Oh my gosh! Well, how difficult. You have a lot of people that are talking about Stan. Not as many as many documentaries have with talking heads. Nobody here is a talking head that's being asked question, answer, this kind of stuff. You have some great interview subjects here talking about Stan that he came up with. Bob Lutz being one of the primary ones. Was it difficult getting any of these individuals to participate?
Not at all. In fact, Ilie Nastasi was supposed to be in the film, but we shot this during the pandemic and therefore had a ton of restrictions. It was just cost prohibitive to go there because, you're going to places, you're quarantined. When I went to Wimbledon, I had to quarantine for 5 days, so hotel costs for that.
Yeah.
And, so in a short answer, it was extremely easy to book. The name, again, Stan has so many of these incredible, lasting relationships all around the world, including Wimbledon. It was It was so easy to get access to shoot in Wimbledon. We had carte blanche literally the day before, just going everywhere.
Wow.
And that's a testament to Stan, again, of being a good person, having these really deep quality relationships. So booking all these people, no problem. It was simple. No one said no.
It's just the logistics of being able to get to them all and include them.
That's correct. That's correct.
Well, one place that you did manage to get to, in addition to Wimbledon, was Germany and Adidas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was a remote shoot. Again, it was commonplace. I had to direct off of a remote monitor, and yeah, so we had a great DP that was local there that went in there and interviewed Casper. I was interviewing Casper via Zoom, and that's how it all went down.
Wow, because I saw in the credits, the Germany unit, and I'm thinking, oh my God, he had to hire an entire German crew.
We sure did
to handle this. And people don't realize the logistics of making a documentary like this. It takes you into different parts of the world, especially during a pandemic, when everybody was on lockdown. It costs money. And documentaries, like independent films, there's not a lot of money to be had. So you've got to use your dollars and pennies very judiciously. And without shortchanging the quality of the story you're telling and the film you're making. This feels like a multi-million-dollar documentary, Danny.
I appreciate that. And it was. I mean, it was higher than maybe your norm. I mean, it was decent. I can't reveal the exact number, but
no, you cannot. No, do not.
No, but credit to Springhelm, and Uninterrupted, who actually financed the film.
Wow.
And it at first we had to make some adjustments because we knew the sort of level of film we wanted to capture. But yeah, you have to be very specific in going into a project, especially when it's independently financed. This wasn't one of those projects where you just shoot and figure it out in post. It had to be pretty prescriptive, even with time, and and that just goes into really good preparation. And I think Stan would agree. He always used tennis as this metaphor for life, and he would talk about preparation a lot. So you'll get a little bit of his philosophy of tennis and how that applies to life in the film. But yeah, we prepared. We went into it, and I think we were all driven by just wanting to do Stan justice. People had approached him to do a film before. He had mentioned that a few times, but finally I think the right pieces came together, and he was so open and welcoming that it made my job just incredibly enjoyable.
What made you say yes to this documentary?
The minute I heard his name, I said yes. And I'm not even joking. I mean, who could turn that down?
Yeah.
It's one of these stories that it's a lasting, enduring story, and they don't come by often. And I like to, part of my filmmaking DNA is really trying to inspire people and have people walk away feeling moved. And as I really got into this film, I was so moved by it that, again, have so much gratitude for being able to experience this and having to get to know Stan. So the short of it is, I could not say no. There's no way.
Yeah, it's not often in your lifetime where something comes along and it's just immediately, you don't have to think about it. It's just, this is it. That's correct. I have to do. And this is your one big, I think you'll have more in your career, but this is an awful good one. I got to ask you about your music. So often music is overlooked in documentaries or even in films, narrative films. But your music here that Cyrus Melchior does, and I know you've worked with Cyrus before for your series Story of Dunk. What were you looking for musically? Because you never overpower us. You give us pieces of music. And so often there's some whimsy to them. There's always a lightness. Everything about this film, be it from your color correction, the cinematography, for present day things, everything, it's light. It feels good. It feels happy. Like Stan, like watching Stan.
That's interesting. first of all, that's amazing. Again, kudos to you for being such a lover of film. The Cyrus is a brilliant artist unto in his own right, and we've just developed a shorthand over the years. We've been working together for almost 20 years,
Wow.
and he's one of those few composers that, he and I grew up in like sort of the LA hip hop scene, so we understand each other as people. And he's an instrumentalist. He can play. I don't even know how many instruments, but the idea was modern classical. Classical because of the elegance. It sort of feels akin to tennis, but didn't want to take your typical classical approach, where I feel like maybe classical is getting a little played out in doc, where I think Chef's Table made it sort of the standard for a lot of documentary, especially in sports. And I wanted to flip that with more of a modern, synthy, sometimes hip-hop take on it. It's amazing that you caught the whimsical stuff, like, for instance, when he stands in the Parisian strip club when they're trying to broker the Adidas deal. There's some whimsicality in there, but also there's some heavier cues for sure, like when we're going through the civil rights or when we're going through Vietnam. But exactly what you said, try to, balance it where it never feels overbearing or overpowering. Music is so incredibly important, especially for film, which, relies heavily sometimes on just photos. Yeah. And so I was keenly aware of how do I amplify these moments when all I have is a photo. So that music was such a big part of this, and I knew it going in that it would be.
Well, and the other great thing about Cyrus's scoring here for you is that with the modern take versus old, been there, done that classical take that so many documentaries use and fall back on, this also with the modern take, it has a great tie-in with the whole idea of sneakers.
Exactly.
Sneakers and the way that the Stan Smith sneaker has just blown up and is still huge. It really embraces the 21st century, not just the 20th century, but the 21st century. And I really like that touch. All of these little touches show me how much thought you put into this production, Danny.
Thank you. I can't appreciate you more. I can't wait. This is such a joy speaking with you. Thank you.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned about Stan Smith in the making of this documentary? Was there anything that really surprised you?
Hands down, his humility. Often with celebrities, you hear the "thank you so much, my fans" and all that. But sometimes you can question the authenticity of it. And I knew because I've worked with quite a few celebrities, and there's different temperaments and ages, and that comes with age. He's obviously a wise soul, and he's learned a lot over his lifetime. But when the cameras were on, when they were off, on his off days, he would be sick, and he would want to hit with me, and we played tennis together. All of those things added up. It's like he is the same person in front of the lights or not, and that really, really surprised me and delighted me. He's just a very humble, warm human being, and he really sets an example for not just celebrities and anyone of that iconic status, but for just everyone. He really taught me a lot.
Wow. So now, in making this documentary now, what did you learn as a filmmaker that you can take forward into your future work?
That's a great question. I don't know if I could identify one thing. I do know that this subject matter, my approach with anything, whether it's doc, scripted, or commercial, because I'm sort of a multidisciplinary filmmaker, is whatever the subject matter, one, you have to be passionate about it. You just have to. And you have to have a genuine interest, but you have to always lead with curiosity and empathy. And I knew that going in, but I think it strengthened that muscle because Stan's interview is 8 hours long. It took a lot of stamina for him mostly.
Wow.
But for me to, be engaged and constantly follow up and know where the holes are and look for new areas to explore. So I think, if anything, this project reinforced my love for the process and, again, reinforcing the need to always be curious. Always be curious.
And, that is a great watchword. Former Broadway legend, film star Carol Cook. That was one of Carol's biggest mantras over the years. As every time I would speak with her, that would be her biggest complaint and lament, is that people today, they don't have curiosity. They don't have curiosity. And to hear you say that, it just reinforces that for me, that everything that she observed when she was teaching master theater classes, and she'd have theater students and they wouldn't know a basic history of theater, and they wouldn't even be curious enough to go to the library or Google it. As she liked to say, that I had to walk 2 miles to the library when I was a little girl growing up in Texas. They just have to Google. But to hear you talk about curiosity, it just reinforces. That's something that's always stuck in my mind, that Carol had told me. And she always said, stay curious. And I am so happy to hear that you do the same, that you are curious.
It's so important. And I think that applies to life, right?
Yes.
There's a lot going on in the world right now, but there's a lot of, this world is vast and it's grand in so many ways. So, having an insatiable appetite to explore, I think it's helpful, just not as a filmmaker, but as a human, and for all of us. And the second part of that, I think I said it earlier, is empathy. Whether you're a screenwriter or whether you're a director or whatever you are in the business, if you lead with empathy, you are going to inherently understand your characters more, and characters are what makes stories tick. And so I think I sort of look at the whole thing holistically in terms of my craft and my life. Lead with empathy, lead with curiosity. So again, going back to your original question, I think this film really reinforced the importance of all of that.
Well, job so well done, Danny.
Thank you.
I have to watch it again because I was just so moved. And I'm going to tell everybody up front, when you watch this, you better have some tissues handy. And you know why I'm saying that, Danny.
Yep.
You better have.
It was intentional.
Yeah. Yes. Third act. I think it's right around the third act. If we're breaking this into acts, you've got to have tissues, because you will start weeping. I'm just saying, even though the documentary, it's uplifting, it is inspiring, it feels good, it feels happy. You still have, there is a moment or two. And that's what even adds and elevates the joy of this documentary, are those teary moments. But now everybody can it's all through the month of May. This is going to be releasing in various markets around the United States, correct?
Correct. And I think, from my understanding, it's expanding too as we speak. So I think it's going well into the summer, from my understanding. It's an evolving thing, because I think there is a demand out there to see the film. So hopefully anyone listening can catch it in their city. It's playing everywhere from Honolulu to New York, down in Texas, everywhere. So hopefully you can go catch it while it's in theaters, because we did shoot it 239 scope, which is extra wide screen. So it was sort of tailor-made for the theater.
Okay, well, now I have to go see it in the theater. I have to go. As much as I love it on, I actually hooked up my laptop HDMI into the TV. So I watched it on a 55-inch screen. But no.
That's big.
Now that you tell me this, now I must go and see it in the theater.
Yep.
I'm a snob that way.
And I genuinely hope people do, because, genuinely people don't associate a documentary with the movie-going experience. No. But hopefully this finds itself somewhere in the middle, where this isn't necessarily that, you get a lot of information and history, but it's a journey through pop culture.
Yeah.
And, hopefully with all the emotions and the upliftment, it's also fun. So I hope people get a kick out of it too.
And how many pairs of Stan Smith sneakers does Stan have?
Stan has quite a few.
I see that. You didn't count them?
No, you couldn't. I mean, you would think, he has one of each of the, his beloved collaborations and all that, but I don't know if I could count. Maybe there's like 50 in his closet.
Oh, there's more than that.
He didn't have like a secret garage or container of like Stan Smith.
But
no.
I guarantee you there's more than 50. Just in what I could see in the frame. I think it's closer to 100 just in that closet. And knowing how much room shoes take up in closets.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'd say, but just an outstanding job, Danny. I can't wait to see what you do next. Are you working on anything now, or just focusing on getting Who is Stan Smith out there?
Definitely focus on getting Stan Smith out there. I am about to start a new feature doc on a music artist. It's pretty iconic, and pretty excited about that. Her and I have been talking. We've been texting yesterday. She kicks off rehearsals for a big tour that's coming up all summer. So that'll be a fun one. I also had a series that's currently airing on PBS called The Expressway with Dule Hill, which explores the transformative power of the arts, and it shares a lot of DNA with Stan Smith of this uplifting. It's pretty emotional. So any viewers that want to cry even more, head over to that show for sure. It's airing Tuesdays, 9 p.m. Pacific and Eastern, and also on the PBS app. It's called The Expressway with Dule Hill, who is a renowned actor, dancer, performer, and it's a beautiful series. It's really from the heart. And
you can't go wrong with PBS.
No, I mean, they provided they were the right home for a series that's about the arts.
Yes.
They've been protecting the arts longer than I've been alive.
Yeah.
And then on the scripted side, I have 2 films that I wrote and we're in early development on. And so, hopefully those can see the audiences pretty soon. But, it's all about the creativity for me. It's all about telling stories that can really sort of represent marginalized people quite often, and can be even a small form of transformation for the moviegoer. So,
well, Danny, I can't wait to see what you bring us next. I hope, beyond hope, we get to speak again in the future. And
love that.
Again, congratulations on Who is Stan Smith. This is truly, it is one of my fave documentaries and films of the year so far.
Oh, my God.
I love it. I really love it. And I can't encourage everybody all over the country to, if it's there, see it. And the website is what? whoisstansmith.com.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
So you can follow it on the website for where the film is opening, where it's playing. Oh, Danny, thank you so much. This has been such a joy getting to speak with you today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your deep, profound appreciation for the filmmaking process, too. It's not often we get to talk this deep about it.
Oh, that is my ultimate joy in life. And to speak with a filmmaker like you, that's just icing on the cake. Danny, thank you so much. And you go have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
And that was director Danny Lee talking about Who is Stan Smith. Seriously, people, you don't want to miss this documentary. If you're a sneaker fan, if you're a tennis fan, if you just want to see a documentary about a really wonderful, nice person, who is Stan Smith. It is making its way. It just had a premiere here in Los Angeles on Friday. On the 10th, it's premiering in New York City. So, eyes peeled. Who is Stan Smith? Netflix. Tune in to Rebel Moon Part 2. Check out some of the great VFX work that is there. And thanks to Marcus Taormina, you'll have a better understanding of how it came to be. And another film you can check out right now that's out that is beyond hilarious. It is called Hanky Panky. How a handkerchief and a hat battle to save the world. Who will win? Who will lose? And how do we have a talking hanky and hat? It's hilarious. Hilarious. If you just want to laugh at something really ridiculous and silly, this is it. Hanky Panky. So, and my interview with the filmmakers will be up sometime this week. Nick Roth and Lindsay Hahn. So, check it out. In the meantime, go to behindthelensonline.net. This show will be up there, as well as on Podbean and all of the usual podcast suspects. And some new interviews are up. Some new reviews are already up. So check them out. And I'll be here next week with the wonderful brothers, Parapolides, Charlie and Vlaz, my pals. Blood of Zeus Season 2 on Netflix. It drops this Friday. So, see it, because we're going to see it this weekend, because we're talking spoilers next Monday. So until then, I'm Debbie Elias. This is Behind the Lens.